Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about deed restrictions and encumbrances on properties. A deed restriction is a private agreement that restricts the use of real estate in some way and are listed in the deed, such as the Southern Nevada Water Authority conservation restriction or any restrictions written in the deed. And that may be the previous seller writing in the deed that you cannot use this property for commercial purposes, for example. That's a deed restriction. In other words, you can buy this house, but you can't turn it into a grocery store. You may have zoning laws that do that too, but that could be in a private deed restriction. The Southern Nevada Water Conservation we have here in Southern Nevada, it's an agreement made with the Water Authority for replacing real turf with artificial turf. That runs with the property, so if there is that restriction or encumbrance on the property, it has to be disclosed to the new buyer, and the new buyer needs to be made aware that if they take out the artificial turf and put real turf back in, they could have to reimburse the Southern Nevada Water Authority for the fee that the previous seller received for taking out the real grass. Okay. Easements. Expressed easement is a written in contract or deed. Any easement that's already written in the deed, such as somebody's necessity to get to their property from your property. They have a right to go across your property to get to theirs because they can't be landlocked. Okay. Implied easements and easement of necessity. Again, an easement of necessity is for access to the neighbor's property behind you, and that may be an expressed easement, or it may just be that's the way we've been doing it for 100 years, and everybody knows you can't be landlocked, so he's going to let you go across there. If it is implied, but then one day they stop you from using that easement, you could take them to court, for example, if you have to be able to get to your property and apply for an express written easement or a court order easement. A prescriptive easement, like implied easements, prescriptive easements are not written down. Rather, they are acquired after long use. Somebody's been traveling across your property to get to their property, which might not be the next one, it could be down the road, but they've been doing this for 100 years or 50 years, and so everybody's okay with it. Even though it's not written down, they've been doing it. You're going to give them the easement or the right of way to use that property. An appurtenant easement is for utilities, aviation, things like that. In residential real estate, we see this all the time with the electric companies here with Nevada Energy. For example, there's a power box at the front of your property, okay? Or the United States Post Office, where they have the multi-use mailboxes at somebody's property. Those are easements. Those are on somebody's property, okay? You could tell it cuts back on the property line. And those are easements, pertinent easements for utilities, for example. Aviation easement. There's actually an easement that you give when you buy a property to the aviation community so they can fly over your house, all right? So easement and gross. The opposite of a pertinent easement is an easement and gross. Here the easement attaches to a specific person instead of to the property itself. So the person goes, wherever they go, they have a right of way, a right to use something in that. Usually it's a subdivision. Okay, this is pretty rare that we see this. Almost all of them run with the land, such as an appurtenant easement. What that means, running with the land, is that once you sell that property, there's still going to be that easement on there, by the way. Okay? Townships, public and private land use. Townships. Townships are 6 miles squared. 6 miles squared in 36 general sections. Okay? Now, we say 6 miles squared, not 6 square miles. It's a big difference, all right? Some of the land is usually developed for parks, schools, fire stations, government facilities, those kind of things. And the rest is usually designated for residential or commercial development. Eminent domain is the power of the government to take private property and convert it to public use. If owners don't want to sell the land, it can be attained by condemnation, a legal process by which the government exercises the right of eminent domain to acquire private property for public uses, such as redevelopment of highways or fire stations or whatever they need to do. Okay. Private land use restrictions. There are deed restrictions and covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, on property whether there is a common interest community or not. CC&Rs can still be on the property and are not the same as deed restrictions. So in other words, if you have a home that's not in an HOA, it still may have CC&Rs on it. All right? Under deed restrictions, a deed restriction runs with the land, meaning that a change in land ownership does not change the restriction. Indeed, their whole purpose is to bind the actions of future owners. Deed restrictions are private agreements that restrict the use of real estate in some way and are listed on the deed. CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, are limits and rules placed on a group of homes, condominium complex, by a builder, a developer, neighborhood association, or homeowners association. There are many properties in Nevada that have CC&Rs, but again, no common interest community or no HOA. The CC&Rs were placed there on the property by the builders. So the builder, when they built that subdivision, they put a CC&R in place that says you can only have so many animals, dogs or cats, you can't have horses, your house has to be at least this size or between this size and this size, whatever it is. As a real estate agent, you have to ensure your seller still gives those to the buyer and the buyer's agent, all right? So, but they're not the same as, again, deed restrictions. Deed restrictions are private agreements. Okay, at this time I'd like to go back and review some of the information we just went through and cover the more important topics. Remember that a deed restriction is a private agreement that restricts the use of real estate in some way and are listed on the deed, okay? Easements, you need to know the different types of easements. An expressed easement is just an easement that's already written down as in a contract or on a deed. An applied easement or easement of necessity is where one landowner lets another landowner cross his property so he can get to his own property, okay? Prescriptive easement is like an applied easement. It's not written down, but they get them from using long use of that easement. In other words, he's been crossing that property for generations, okay? So he's still allowed to apply and get that. An appurtenant easement is an easement for utilities. We usually call it our utility easement, all right? And an easement in gross is the opposite of an appurtenant easement and is an easement where the easement attaches to the specific person instead of the property. So instead of having an electric easement, maybe it's a cable guy or maybe it's a different kind of easement that goes with that company and they're allowed to go on there and fix whatever they need to fix, okay? Public and private land use. Townships are made of 6 miles squared, 36 sections, very important. Some of the land is developed for parks, schools, fire stations, government buildings, and the rest is usually residential and commercial development. Eminent domain is the power of the government to take private property and convert it into public use, such as they need to take out half of the subdivision to make the freeway wider, okay? If owners don't want to sell the land, it can be obtained by the government from a process called condemnation. It's a legal process by which the government exercises its right of eminent domain to acquire private property for public use, again, such as redevelopment for highways. Okay, private land use restrictions. There are deed restrictions and there are covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs on properties. And whether there is an HOA or common interest community or not, there still can be CC&Rs on the property. Now, deed restrictions run with the land, meaning that they change in landowner, a change in landowners does not change the restriction, okay? Covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs, are limits and rules placed on a group of homes, condominium complex, by a builder, developer, or neighborhood association, or homeowners association. They can be changed at almost any time by the HOA or the management company. There are many properties in Nevada, again, that have CC&Rs, but no common interest community. There's no monthly dues, there's no management company. These are original CC&Rs that are placed on by the builder. This is very common in Nevada. But you still must make sure that your seller gives them to the buyer. Or if you're the buyer's agent, make sure your buyer gets them, okay?